Hello, good morning, everybody. I hope you're all having a wonderful morning. It's been lovely, nice and early. Today, I'm going to be talking to you a little bit about the Azure Developer CLI and how you can get your code to the cloud. So this all came around from figuring out pain points from developers and what they really wanted to get into Azure. So a quick show of hands, who develops applications that run on Azure? Okay, so there's like a handful of you, not many. Cool. This is good because this is an opportunity for me to show you one quick and pretty simple way to do it. So quick agenda, what are we going to talk about today? So we're going to go through DevOps, some pretty basic fundamentals. Going to look at some dev tooling, so the different tooling that I work on, and the Azure Developer CLI itself. And I'm going to show you a little bit of a demo as well. So who am I? My name is Liam Hampton, and I'm a Microsoft Senior Cloud Advocate. And I have the privilege of working with all the developer toolings, or all the developer tool teams around the world. So predominantly, I work with the CLIs, funnily enough. So the Azure CLI, the Developer CLI, and the GitHub CLI. They all kind of work together in a roundabout way. I'm an Azure ambassador. I like to think about security and how security principles are first and foremost when it comes to developing applications. I always speak to developers who don't necessarily think about security when they're coding. So it's kind of like a nice insight to be able to understand what it is that you find hard about it. I write Go code, although that has got nothing to do with today. That's just my background as a software developer. And I like to travel the world. Very cliche. But yeah, being able to travel the world. I'm from the UK, so coming to Germany here to talk to you all is fantastic. So let's start with the three buckets. So I'm going to split this up in three ways. You've got developers, the process, and the dev tooling that they use. So developers, you and I. So platform engineers, biz app engineers, DevOps engineers, whatever you want to call yourself. The process you use, whether it be agile or whether waterfall, those kind of methodologies, and how you really go about using them. And then the developer tools, because well, there's so many of them, right? There's lots of developer tools to write your applications and be able to get it in the cloud or run on-premise. So first, let's look at developers. In the past, let's say early 2000s, this was the kind of way you did it, right? You had development and operations. So development, very much maintaining the application, new features, bug fixes, what it is a developer really has to do. And they have got their very own objectives. Their ultimate goal was to change the application for the better to get the next feature out. Then on the flip side of the board, you had the operations team, which would be maintaining it, deploying it, making sure the availability is there, making sure that when you go and hit the URL or the API, one side of the world, it returns the correct data for you. And if something goes wrong, bottleneck, what happens? Well, they're the people that are on call. There was no real common goal. IT pros and developers had very much different ideas and goals in mind for what they were doing at this point. So writing code and supporting it, very different together. And then in early 2007, around that time, this methodology came about, so DevOps. So you had product engineers on the left and platform engineers on the right. Now, this was very much a way to touch every single phase of the software development lifecycle. As you can see, we've got plan, code, build, test, release, deploy, operate, and monitor. So I'm sure you would have all seen something like this before when it comes to talking about DevOps. But in the middle, we've got that little jagged line. That promotes communication. So this is a way for product engineers and platform engineers to talk together. You know, that was something that didn't happen. There was that mist in between before. Now they're collaborating. They have a common goal. That leads to shorter lead times, so you can release quicker, better, testing as well, so automated testing, and you've got lower failure rates because of that. So just a quick whirlwind overview of DevOps. And some of the best practices. So ultimately, with that infinity loop, you think it goes round and round and round, but it doesn't, not always. Teams think they use DevOps, but they don't. Some people think that they've done it once and it's great and it works, but that's it. They then don't do it again. So some of the best practices, you've got continuous integration, CI, CD. So being able to deploy your code and have it update automatically for you and get it out there, release it on time is fundamental. We live in a world where these new products are released every week, right? Not every 6 months. If you go to a customer and say, hey, we'll develop this application, release it in 6 months, and then version 2 will be out next year, they're going to, right, go away. We don't want any of that. That's not going to happen. So you want to infuse these kind of best practices. Automated testing. You don't want your local developer or your developers to be running local tests all the time. That means you've got to give them the best machine if you've got a really chunky application. You want to be able to save time. You want to be able to do this automatically in the cloud and use different tech for that. Monitoring and alerting. What happens when things go wrong? You want to be able to pick out and understand where it goes wrong quickly to be able to debug that. So another a best practice, looking at monitoring. And then you've got infrastructure as code. If you want to be writing infrastructure, you don't want to be going into the portal, and you don't want to be clicking and deploying and then trying to tie it all together in your web browser. That takes so long. So you just write a YAML file, or Terraform, or Bicep, or an ARM template, any of them. Or if you use an AWS, CloudFormation, or whatever they use. And then in 2013, Docker came around, and 2014, Kubernetes shortly followed. So you got the microservice architecture, which helped boost this DevOps lifecycle, which helped enable you to modularize your code and rid of the monoliths. That's kind of how they thought about it, right? I see some people, yeah, but no, not always the best way. But this helped boost that. Who in the room has read this book? The Developer Relations, How to Build a Successful Developer Program. Wonderful. Nobody. I'm the only one. So halfway through this book, I came across this table, and it is phenomenal. Is development harder or easier today? And this gives some pretty compelling arguments against both sides of it. So on the left-hand side, it's easier because you have got lower barriers to entry. Totally true. You go to a student and say, go learn Python. Straight on YouTube, straight on Pluralsight, straight on any of these websites. Free Code Camp, awesome. Microsoft Learn, loads of material for you to get started. So it's really easy. What about recognition? If you're in a team, you're a junior developer, you want to do the most and get the biggest impact, you can do that with very little code. So you get a lot more recognition. So you can create this wonderful, great thing using this really complicated framework, which someone else has done, but you can just use it, call the API, and ta-da, it works. We're all used to that now. And so many tools. I'm not going to go through all these, but tools. So many tools. You have about, well, I'm going to say hundreds of tools for the same problem. So, it's great. You can pick and choose, pick and choose. If you want free trials, go for it. Go grab that free trial. Go get that free trial. There's so much to choose from. So it makes it really easy. And on the right-hand side, what makes it super hard? All right, so many languages to choose from. Go to a student and say, get started with computer science. How do I learn to code? Where do I start? Which one? Python, JavaScript, Java, whatever. Abundantly clear now, AI. Think about LangChain. Where did that come from? I didn't even hear about that until this year. So it's kind of like, there's so much there to choose from. Which one's the right path? And with that comes all the noise. And then you've got healthy competition with a lot of the developer tooling. So you think about, hey, one tool does one job very good. The other one does the same thing, just a little bit different. Which one do you choose? So this is a really good way to think about whether development is easier or harder and put it into your development. So hold on to that. Think about that as we go through this. I'm going to look at your applications now. A really basic 3-tier application. You would have seen this, yeah? We've all seen that. So you've got a front end with UI, you've got a back-end server, and you've got a database storage. Pretty simple on the face of it, right? It's the ideation stage. You're sat there writing this locally, whiteboarding it, doing whatever. So then you choose some languages, frameworks. Let's say we've got React, you've got Node, and you've got MongoDB. Pretty simple 3-tier application. Local development works wonderful. How do you get that in the cloud? And now this poses a whole bunch of questions, because this is the difficulty. And this is what developers that I've spoken to have said, what, it's really easy. I can run this application. It works perfectly. When I try and deploy it to Azure or AWS or whatever, it's really, really hard. There's so many different things you have to think about. So let's talk you through how you get that code into the cloud. Well, that 3-tier application doesn't look so simple anymore. That looks pretty complicated because this is a very, very basic cloud architecture diagram for that 3-tier application. I've called it the build plus stage at this point because there's resources and considerations that you need to think about. It's not just building your application. Let's walk through it. So in Azure, you've got the resource group, which houses everything. Now, this is very similar across all clouds. Inside there, we've got an app service plan that holds your 2 app services. That's the front end and the back end. So we've got a web API, or a web app, and you've got your API app as well. Then you think about security. You don't want to be posting your environment variables. You don't have to be storing them in all these different third-party places. You don't want to have to write an M file every time and give it to somebody every time they want to spin it up. No, so you use a key vault. Right? It's a common storage for those keys, secure. Then you've got your storage, and you've got your database. So for this instance, I'm going to be using a Azure Cosmos DB, which is basically a wrapper around MongoDB, so it's a document database. Then you look at monitoring. How can you see what's going on with that application? What's happening? You want to look into it? You want to see what's going on? Well, cool. You've now got Log Analytics Workspace, Application Insights, a portal dashboard. It is hard. So much going on. So here, right away, just for this basic app, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different elements. But you're not done yet because you want to integrate that and you want to have it done automatically. You want to be able to test it. You want that to be run as well. So now you've got this other element of GitHub Actions. I may be in the way here. Add that into your CI/CD pipeline. Add that in. Creates more mess. Oh, look, we're still not done. We still have configuration. You can deploy all this stuff in Azure. It's not going to talk to each other. I could deploy 2 apps simultaneously. They're not going to know about each other because they're completely different. So you've got to tie them all together. So you've got your user base, you've got your roles, you've got security, principals, who can modify this application, what can push to it. Local dev support. So if you did want to run locally, have you got VS Code extensions? Have you got your Visual Studio extensions or IntelliJ or whatever you're using? Have you got all that in your repository as well? Probably not. So as you can see, this is just kind of like snowballing into a pretty big application. And it's a lot. We don't really want to be thinking about all this as developers because not every developer knows every single stage of the DevOps lifecycle, or the software development lifecycle for that matter of fact. So let's look at developer tooling. What developer tools do we use to help make this easier? So let's look at Codespaces. Who's used Codespaces? Okay, a couple. Perfect, only a couple. So Codespace is on GitHub, and you can access it through your repository. It's all there. They are free to use. You have like a certain limit for you. But it's basically a virtual machine running on Azure, which has got some container in it. And that container is essentially your workspace. You've got some CPUs. You can dedicate, I don't know, however much power you want to it, whether it's like 2, 4, 8, I think it goes right up. And then you've got the disk storage as well. It is ephemeral, so you do lose it if it's shut down. It's very much a container. But that's also part of the beauty of it, because it's perfect for learning development. So as I said, in here, hopefully this works. So over there, you've got that button, that code button. You'd hit Codespaces on the ribbon. And then here, you'd say create a new Codespace on whatever branch you want. Here, I'm just doing it on main. Really simple. And I would forgive you for thinking that this is VS Code. This is what you'd expect, but it's not. Somewhere behind me, down here, Codespaces. It looks identical. You have everything you need. So you've got the marketplace. You've got plugins. You have got your live share, remote development. Everything you have locally, you can have in Codespace as well. Admittedly, there may be limitations to third-party marketplace plugins or extensions because they may require a local machine, but very, very similar nonetheless. And that leads me to dev containers. So whenever you run a Codespace, you're running in a dev container. Who's heard of a dev container? Yeah, all right, more people. This is like an early morning workout. Sorry, I'm going to keep putting your arms up. So a dev container is essentially a Docker container, but it provides a fully featured development environment for you. So you can have everything in there. And the magic sauce is this thing. It is a .dev container directory with a devcontainer.json file inside it. It holds your frameworks, your runtimes, your tools, any extensions that you want. And I will show you this as well with some code. So it's a pretty easy way to get your project into the cloud or start developing remotely. So you don't need the biggest, powerful local computer. You don't need to spend hours running up a development environment with the newcomer into your team. Right? It can all be here if you just write up a pretty simple structured JSON file. And that's where it lives, right in the root of your directory. It doesn't make any difference to your project besides being able to run it in Codespace or in a local container. So you can run this in Docker, by the way, locally if you have it, right? And it just looks like VS Code. That's what it is. It just gives you an isolated environment for your development. Really cool. So many use cases, all right? And we're going to circle back to this in a bit. So let's talk about AI. What's happening in the AI world? As you've probably seen, there's about 7,000 apps roughly, and it was from McKinsey. I think I got that statistic from. AI apps have been released in 2023. Well, brilliant. Who knows and who can name every single one of those? Nobody. I'm going to name about 4 or 5, right? You've got, I don't know, ChatGPT, Copilot, you've got Bard, you've got IBM Watson X, you've got loads of these big generative AI models that are helping you, all these LLMs. ChatGPT is very much a jack of all trades, master of none. It can write you a law paper, it can write some code, it can probably help you write a cover letter for your next job. However, Copilot is based on the OpenAI Codex LLM, which is specifically done on code. So it's trained on code. All right? So if you ask it questions on code, it's got a better, more often than not, better answer. And if we have time, I will show you how I do that as well with Copilot Chat. So 3 ways that AI can help you. It can help explain the code, it can help write the code, and it can help fix the code. And that's pretty useful for developers, especially if you're learning and getting started today. So let's turn our eye a little bit and turn the narrative to the Azure Developer CLI. What is it? All right, so it is a high-level, developer-friendly CLI application tool. And it's part of an ecosystem. Okay, so developers are used to this very, I don't know, imperative paradigm where CLIs are using flags and arguments. They're very isolated from one another. Say if you want to stand something up in Azure, right, using the Azure CLI, you'd have to do a couple of commands to get, your application up and running. You've all seen these blog posts, right, where you have like command, get halfway down, it fails, and then, oh, there's no explanation, right? This is a very isolated way to provide a fully fledged end-to-end system with one CLI. So it uses the kind of commands like azd init, azd up, monitor, pipeline config. Pretty simple commands, right? It's very intuitive. And the azd up is kind of like the magic command. It puts in 3 commands into one. So you've got azd package, azd provision, and azd deploy. So you just really need to run one command once you have your code base there and ready. So I mentioned it's a bit of an ecosystem. And the ecosystem comprises of a couple of things. Right? So you have the CLI, first and foremost. You've got the extension inside VS Code or Visual Studio. And that is also within Azure Tools. So you can install them independently if you like. And then you have this wonderful thing of templates. And these templates are open source. So you as a developer can go and make your own. The ultimate goal here is to provide you an end-to-end system and give you that freedom and flexibility to run with it for an entire application, not just pieces of it. And we're not asking you to go search for lots of things. It's just all within one little wheelhouse. So these templates are written in Bicep or Terraform. Now, Terraform is in alpha at the moment, but it very much still works with the azd CLI. And Bicep, have you heard of Bicep? A couple of nods, a couple of hands. Cool. So Bicep is a domain-specific language. It's for Azure. And it is a wrapper around ARM templates. ARM templates are notoriously difficult to write. So Bicep is a lovely language to kind of wrap it. It's pretty intuitive and quite developer-friendly. And I'll show you what a Bicep template looks like in a minute. So if you do want a template, you can head over to awesome azd templates, and all the resources for everything here will be shared in a link at the end, so don't worry. But these are basically blueprints for your applications. So as your application grows, or if you want to sort of find a way to get into Azure with Bicep, this is a perfect place to get that infrastructure as code from. All right, they're not hello world, they're fully fledged applications. So as you can see here, there's like a couple maybe at the bottom for ChatGPT. These are like the recent ones. They're made by Azure. They're made by Microsoft employees and certified Microsoft trainers. You've got MVPs, and of course, the community, because this wouldn't be open source without the community, right? It wouldn't be what it is without you all. So if you can't find what you like, or you can't find what you need, please make it. Help us. So the languages it supports. So I've banged on a little bit about infrastructure as code, Bicep, and whatnot, but the languages and the platforms that it really supports from a programmer's perspective is Python, .NET, Node, and Java. Now, these are some of the biggest and most used frameworks or languages on Azure, or in the community, for that matter of fact. So that's why they support, and hopefully this will grow. But at the moment, these are the ones that it supports, right? The main chunk of them. So let's have a look at a little demo. So in the interest of time, I'm going to play a video, but then at the end, I'm going to go through the code and show you exactly what's going on. So the first thing I'm going to do is I've opened us up in a Codespace. And I have run azd auth login. Now that is a wrapper around the AZ login. Very, very similar, exactly the same experience as you'd get. Just log into Azure. It needs that to be able to get your subscriptions. Now, subscription is just where you host all your applications. The next command I'm going to run is azd up. So it's that magical command of package, provision, and deploy. I select the location. I'm using UK South, because this is where I was when I made the demo last week. And I've spun this up a little bit. So sped it up, and it will only take a couple of moments. But you'll understand why I sped this up. It does take a few minutes to stand this infrastructure up, but it looks pretty simple on the face of it. It's not. If you look at all of these, plus more up there, it stood it up in 10 minutes. And this is a full application, right? This is a to-do application, and it's the same application I showed you in the diagram just a moment ago. So the API is spitting out a Swagger doc, so you can see all of the routes and the API routes that I want to hit, and I can go test them and give them a go if I want. And the other side on the web app is the actual front end for it. So it allows you to go in and play. This is me playing around with the to-do app, creating some traffic so I can hopefully show you something in the monitoring. Because, hey, it would be pretty boring if I showed you a monitoring tool and it didn't actually show anything on the graph. So you can get this template, by the way. This is Node server, React front end, and the MongoDB on Azure. And we'll talk through everything to do with pricing and all that at the end as well. But as you can see, that's wonderful. Application stood up, does what it needs to do. Now I do azd monitor, another really powerful command. If you've ever used Azure and you want to see or get to the monitoring or the sorry, that wasn't the monitoring one. That was clicking on the resource group link. Sorry. So just showing you inside the resource group, everything that's there. The next command is monitor. So if you've ever got to the monitoring platform on Azure, it takes a couple of clicks to get there. And it's not easy. And what this has done is this has created an entire dashboard for you. And that dashboard shows everything to do with the application. So from the mapping, so the Azure map, you've got all your reliability, your responsiveness, your browser. You can check out and see whatever's going on. So on the right-hand side, you can kind of see there's some requests that have come through. And you can go check out the logs and see the code, do whatever you need to do inside here. So this is very much the operation side of DevOps. And you can just make sure and understand what's going on. So you also have access to all of the browser responsiveness, so you can check out what's going on in your browser. And like I said, this is just a perfect place to be able to run and see everything else. This has stood everything up for me. If I was to do this natively, if I was to just sit down at my PC and run this, my goodness, it would take me so long to do that. It would be unbelievable. Right, it'd probably take me about a week to figure all this out. Now, the final command is actually a pretty powerful one. And this is the pipeline config. Now, this is a wrapper, somewhat a wrapper, uses the GitHub CLI to go off and create your service principles and set up an application workflow. So I'm going to show you the GitHub Actions workflow shortly. But this goes off, does everything for me. So I go in, I log in, hopefully, eventually, click enter. All right, I'm just checking it, making sure it's pushing to the right branch first. So we'll throw it in, click enter, and I'll just go through this. I haven't sped this up. This is super quick, right? So this one is not sped up at all. I've done this deliberately, and that is because I wanted to show you exactly how easy it is. The only thing I've chopped out of this is actually my login credentials, because I don't want you to see all of those. That would be a bit silly, right? So you can see it's gone off. It's created my principal, which basically allows it to manipulate things in Azure. So I'm giving it access to certain elements of the application, saying what it can and can't access. It's pretty powerful, right? So this is a really nice way. So we've got the application stood up. We have got a GitHub pipeline. We've got the configuration now. And that is that entire application workflow that I showed you earlier, which has about 11 different elements to it, which is wonderful. But all you need to do is write a couple of commands. And it's quite quick and easy. And these are reusable. So you can grab this and take it for your own applications as well. So you're not just bound to this one. You can take this, take the infrastructure. As you can see, I don't actually run the workflow, but it is there, and you can see it here. So I'll go over, click on the workflow, and ta-da, I can run it. So it's there, which I think is pretty awesome and pretty neat. Now I'm going to show you all of that. I'm going to walk through the code and what it's done very quickly. So let's come out of these. over here. There we go. So what I'm going to do, in this application, we have got the Azure YAML. Now, the Azure YAML is basically metadata for the project. Now, this project is saying to Azure, hey, look, you've got, this is your title, this is the metadata, the template that I'm using. So in the AZD templates, this is what I'm using. We've got the web side of it. So you have the source web, and it's going to say the language is JavaScript, and it's an app service. Pretty simple. These are the two main elements in my source folder. Now, the caveat to this is you do need a source and infra. So if you do pull a template down, all you have to do is delete the source code and just replace it with your one. So in here, we can see we've got web and API. Retrospectively, they've got all of that, all of their code in. Now, the infra folder is a brilliant way for you to get up and started with all your infrastructure as code. So look at the main bicep. We have got the key vault. It is creating a database. It is creating all sorts of stuff for us. And this is just going off. This is a really modularized way to create your infrastructure. So this is what bicep is. If you were to write this in ARM templates, my God, it would be mind-blowing. It would be hard to do. There's so much going on in here. And retrospectively, if you look in the core and the app, you've got all the different bicep folders for each element inside this template. We've also got the VS Code, which many of you may have seen in your VS Code editor. So you've got your extensions, you've got everything you need. So from this one, we've got Azure Tools. And this is the pipeline, the GitHub pipeline that I have as well. So this is basically pre-made for me. All it's doing is checking out my code, installing AZD, installing Node. Admittedly, I know it's calling Node 16. I will update it. I did see that it's going to end of life soon. And a whole lot more. So it's setting all my credentials and everything that I could possibly need in GitHub for this pipeline to work and deploy seamlessly. Now, I did say I'd come back to dev container. Now, this is what a dev container looks like. It is giving it a name. So we're calling it the Azure Developer CLI. We are pulling an image from the Microsoft registry. And again, it's just a bullseye image. You've got some features and some customizations. So you can see here, install some extensions. You've got linter, prettier, you've got GitHub Actions, the Azure Dev, you've got Docker, in Docker, all those kind of things. This is all a dev container is. It's just a set of instructions for you to work from. And the best part about it is a public domain, right? So you can do port forwarding. So if you're running this in a code space, you can then connect to it from a local development environment. So hopefully if this is still up and running, hopefully you can see this. Shout if you can't. But you have all these different settings in here. Just reload that page. You have all the different settings inside there, which allows me to then open this in whatever I want. So browser, Visual Studio Code, JetBrains, or Jupyter Lab, right? So you have options to run this locally as well as remotely. It's one of the powerful things about dev containers. So what's updated in September? So some of the recent updates for the AZD CLI, well, I just kind of negate everything I've just told you about, because that's one method. The other method is you can run AZD over your entire code base. And I urge you to go and watch a video on the blog, which is linked at the end, because it's so powerful. You can come with a very basic Python application. You can run AZD over your code base. It will tell you that it's Python, and it will then go off and be able to build you some artifacts for it. So it will write your infrastructure as code. It will write the basic elements that you need to get that from your local machine to the cloud. It supports cloud-native buildbacks from Oryx. So Oryx is a build system which automatically compiles source code repos into runnable artifacts. So again, part of our lovely system we have with Microsoft. And you can specify custom template repositories. So say you're in a team and you want your team of developers to spin up the same environment or this same entire sort of infrastructure. Well, you're no longer pointing to a public repository of all these templates. You can point to a private repository of these templates. So you can have it all up in your own. So you're not looking at all the Azure samples. You're not looking at all the open source ones. You're looking at the ones that you've dictated your team can look at. So you can point towards a list. And that's perfect, right? So, hey, new developer Timmy, go and stand up this infrastructure. Here's a link. Go. AZD up. You're up and running. All right? So some really cool updates coming. And this was just happened to be September this month, right? So it kind of negates a little bit about what I was telling you. But hey, it's awesome. So some use cases. Building a new startup. So I work with entrepreneurs and startups across Microsoft and in the community. So if you want to get up and started really quickly, awesome way to do it. Team onboarding. Kind of mentioned the Timmy situation where you have a new developer starting in your team and you don't really want them to continuously bug the senior developers because they're too busy creating the next best feature. Well, team onboarding, right? You can set up a new environment for them. Environment separation. So we haven't really gone into this too much in this presentation. However, you can have one for test, you can have it for production, you can have it for development, and you can maintain them simultaneously across the board, which I think is pretty cool. And of course, student and university classes. I remember when I was at university about 5 or 6 years ago, we took 3 hours to stand up a very simple application, and it was like a simple virtual machine with a little Nginx application or server or whatever it was, and it just took hours to set that up. You know, that was like the wasted lecture in my eyes. With these kind of tools, it just makes it easier. So this is just one example of 100 tools that you can use to get your code from your local machine to a cloud environment, pretty quick, pretty simple, and in an efficient way. So some key takeaways. Dev containers are powerful. So please, in my opinion, I think every project should have a dev container. It is absolutely no harm to start creating those. It doesn't sort of mix with anything else. It's just a simple file with some instructions to tell it what to install. The Azure CLI provides you a really quick way to get from code to cloud. Some best practices are infused right away. So you've got OIDC, so OpenID Connect, so security best practices right from the beginning. And like I said, all of these open source templates are reviewed by people at Microsoft as well in the open source community. So they are very much top tier and really well looked into. And they're open source. So if you can't find them, give it a go. So some FAQs, because I believe we're now at 30 minutes. Some FAQs, just to get you started. How can you install it? Well, it is supported on Windows, Linux, and Mac, and also in dev containers. You can hook it up through a curl request, or I don't know, chocolatey, or whatever it is you want to use. It's available and supported on all those architectures. The difference between the Azure CLI and the Azure Developer CLI, because I didn't get a chance to cover it. So the Azure CLI is very much a single granularity of CLI. So you can go in, put all your flags, arguments, and yada, yada. You can have like a command that long, and it still wouldn't be enough. Whereas the Developer CLI, you just need 1 or 2. It's very much an ecosystem and a way for you to sort of in a roundhouse. Can you have more than one environment? Yes, kind of just covered that. Dev, test, production, etc. And can you use a free subscription? Yes, you can. So if you have an Azure free subscription, all these templates are based off like a very low costing method. So I'm not going to say they're all free because they're not. These are paid for services, but you can use a free subscription. Just be wary that if you have a free subscription, then you can only deploy one service in one location at a time. So I probably wouldn't be able to do the one today because there's 2 app services in the same location, if that makes sense. One would be on free tier, one would be on like basic. By the way, costs are negligible for that one. And with that, I want to say a massive thank you very much for listening and for being here today. And if you have any questions, I'd love to hear them. If you want to see more about this, then catch me at the end. I can show you some GitHub Copilots or any of the chat and stuff because I think we're actually out of time. Thank you.